You made it. Welcome back, you BEA beautiful souls. Today's video is going to be a retrospective on Shinobi. Shinobi on release was quite a different character and probably one of the most interesting designed heroes we have to this day. When For Honor added Shinobi and Centurion, those DLCs kicked some serious ass. When you compared these two characters to the rest of the cast, you could really tell that they put some love into these heroes. I tell you what, man, a Shinobi jumping around with their kicks, throwing ranged heavies? Yeah, that's right, Shinobi had ranged heavies. Centurion kneeing people in the face and punching them, a character that most people absolutely adore simply because he used his fist to talk. These two were the staple and probably, in my honest opinion, the highlight of all DLC characters we have received in the entire For Honor history. These were the most hyped characters, and for good reason too, and I'm gonna talk about what Shinobi was and what he really represented in For Honor. Was Shinobi a better character now or back then? For Honor in the beginning of its lifespan was probably the most fun because nobody really knew what they were doing, and that can be a good thing because we're all just trying to have fun, and even though there's still people who are trying to sweat their balls off and playing as if there's $50 on the line of every match, it didn't really matter because a lot of the characters had a lot of pizzazz to them. Shinobi was quite the broken character. There were so many things about him, good and bad, that made it impossible to hate the game. I'm not gonna lie to you, even though the character was a really strong powerhouse in so many ways and absolutely horrible in others, seeing Shinobi out on the battlefield really made you rethink your life. Do I really want to boot up For Honor again just so that this mosquito can run around the entire map with his Naruto run? Dipping my balls in sulfuric acid and jumping off a cliff is probably better than playing against a bunch of Shinobis in 4v4 and in duels, because this character was absolutely the bane of my existence if I wasn't picking Shinobi myself. And that's just the sad truth. This character is the most mobile hero in the entire game. Y'all remember high level Shinobi? Well, high level Shinobi consisted of basically two things: unlocking and running away, and then using your slide tackle. The slide was probably the most broken thing in the game, pretty much unpunishable and absolutely cancerous to deal with. A little Timmy will go into For Honor and think that the game is strictly just about pairing lights and heavies, but little does he know at the higher levels, all you do is abuse mechanics. Barak Yeet, one of the best comp players out there, or used to be, he doesn't play For Honor anymore due to multitude of reasons. He fought one of the best Shinobis out there back in the olden golden For Honor days, and the gameplay is just consisting of running away the entire time. Lots of micro plays that higher levels player will understand, and it does keep you at the edge of your seat, but you can tell that it's not the most fun experience. And truth be told, who plays For Honor for fun? A lot of people could not punish this. Even if you had an undodgeable dodge attack, Shinobi could recover so quickly that he could easily deflect that in time. It was probably one of the most cheesiest things that this character had, and it was simply a viable option too. At the highest levels, Shinobi players would abuse this so much, it was absolutely atrocious. Not every single player or every Shinobi player you met in duels or 4v4 would do this. Actually, in 4v4s, they would do this a lot, but in duels, it was a lot less common. But if you played at the higher levels and you fought higher MMR players that simply wanted to win and improve their KD ratio, well, you'd come across these bozos who would simply, after a light attack or just spacing you out and looking at you in the face and then unlocking and running away to outspace you or get their stamina back, because mind you, stamina back in the day was absolutely atrocious. Everybody had horrible stamina costs, and the stamina gain that you got was pretty much minuscule in comparison to what it is today. So thank God we actually got those stamina buffs. But Shinobi players would constantly be unlocking, and you'd have to like unlock yourself to chase after him. It was quite frankly a cat and mouse type of situation, and Shinobi was pretty much the queen or king of doing that, and it was simply the best move to use for high level plays, because what do you want to do? You want to waste all your stamina and be stuck against my mix-up? No, you don't. You want to win the game, as most players do, and you got to do what you got to do and abuse things and exploit things that give you an edge against other players. That's just how it is. And Shinobi was one of those, you know, he was a little bit hard to use in the beginning, like I say for even Shinobi right now in his current iteration, but once you understand how he works and what his tools are, how powerful they are, he becomes an S tier pick. If you're looking in the footage in the background, he can do so many dodges in a row. You've noticed that probably on the live version, he usually only does 2 dodges, but in this iteration, the one where he released, and before he got his rework, he could do infinite amount of dodges, and this was incredibly powerful. Shinobi's biggest strength was making your life miserable. I shit you not. He had one of the best tools to outspace you and make you whiff your attacks and then punish you with the kick afterwards. For Honor at the time had spacing problems and of course offensive issues, but a lot of characters had really strong defense like Shove on Block, Lawbringer with tons of damage. Shinobi was not different at all. He came with a plethora of problems that needed to be solved and required a huge rework in the future. Shinobi was one of the most picked characters in the game, and rightfully so, because he had so many tools that made him feel like an absolute ninja compared to the rest of the cast. He was simply way too unique for Honor. There wasn't anyone on the scale of this character when it came to the moveset, the animation, and the Riz. Maybe next to Centurion might rise above that, but you could say Shinobi was the most interesting character out of the entire Samurai faction, and Centurion for the Knight faction. Now, it may sound like I'm glazing Shinobi back in the day, but the truth is I really liked how he worked, even though he was absolute cancer to deal with and sometimes to use, honestly. Ubisoft devs in the early days really wanted to create something unique and something that really stood out compared to the rest of the cast. I mean, it's a DLC character. You spend real money or hard-earned steel to play something quite different from the story heroes. And with Shinobi, it was money well spent. However, I will say there were a lot of drawbacks to playing him because he was so frail. How frail? Well, he had 90 HP compared to the rest of the cast, and on average, 120 was the average HP. Just being defeated in about 2 heavies and 1 light attack was ridiculous in comparison to the other cast where they had to at least take 3 heavies to be finished off. Shinobi truly was the squishiest character in the game. But even though he was a glass cannon, he had some of the most ridiculous tools that you could utilize in teamfights and in duels. Absolutely atrocious for people who did not pick such a mobile character like Shinobi. His kick was 400 ms, the forward and the dodge one, and if you didn't know, Shinobi could also do a side dodge into a back dodge into a kick, and that was incredibly good for outspacing your opponents. Characters like Warden, characters like Wardler, who could go into a forward dodge bash, you could easily avoid that and punish accordingly while outspacing them. Absolutely ridiculous character, and later on, they did reduce it to 600 ms. Let's not forget that this kick has super armor. Super armor, what is that? Super armor basically means that nothing can touch you. This will win every single time. You know how hyper armor works? Well, basically a bash will beat hyper armor, but hyper armor basically beats everything else. Lights, heavies, unblockable heavies, undodgeable heavies, all that good stuff. But with super armor, nothing beats it, not even bashes. You're guaranteed to win the trade, not necessarily on damage, but the interaction. And with that kick, you would use it to out-trade people or just go into your safe offense. And with this big issue on Shinobi, this was quickly resolved due to the player base absolutely hating this change, and we were all unks back in the day. We had no idea what was happening. We thought that things were a little bit too fast, but in reality, we did not know what fast was quite yet. So Ubisoft had to nerf it down to 600 ms, but it still kept its super armor properties for a bit of time. Now when you look at the big picture, he technically really has no openers anymore. His kick was too slow, people could have just simply dodged on animation or orange, and at that point he simply became more a defensive powerhouse. So if you had good reactions, you could punish easily and deal quite a bit of damage while outspacing your opponents. Shinobi in Season 1 had quite a bit of things that made him stand out above the rest. Let me just quickly go over how dangerous Shinobi actually was. Now, his deflect did 50 damage. That's right, 50 damage, 25 bleed, and 25 raw. He had different follow-ups too, so if you get a deflect, you would teleport, and the thing with the ranged heavy attack, which is the follow-up, you have to do it on a guard that is not on their side. So just do it on the opposite side, and you're guaranteed a 25 damage. If you do it on the same side, they can easily block it, of course. And don't forget, Shinobi had one of the worst guards in the entire game. It would disappear instantly in less than a second. Absolutely atrocious. You had to refresh this every single time. It was called a reflex guard. back in the day, so you had to keep this up constantly. I cannot tell you how many times I've been hit by heavies simply by not being able to refresh it in time. Something that definitely made me want to smash my head on my desk. Now with the deflect, you are able to use a follow-up light as well instead of going for the raw heavy attack, the ranged heavy attack, but that was pretty much pointless because it dealt so much less damage in comparison to the ranged heavy, so you always wanted to use that anyways. But it was nice being able to have two different options for your deflects, even if you want to be super duper optimal. Another thing about Shinobi too is that he didn't have any undodgeable or unblockable finisher heavy attacks, nor his neutral ones. What he really had that was interesting was that he was able to use a ranged heavy attack. Shinobi's heavy could be twirled around and charged with his heavy attacks due to his Kusarigamas actually being ranged heavy attacks from neutral. So in Dominion and duels, you could do this from a really far distance. And duels is pretty much worthless because you could easily parry it because you're focused on it. But in 4v4, he could be springing it up from behind you, throwing those heavies for free back shots, and you would not be able to do anything about it. You could block it, you could try to parry it, but there were so much indicators coming at your face that you had to be focused. And the neat thing about this is that there's two versions of it. So he could do a raw heavy attack for 25 damage, or he could do a guard break. And that's right, he had a ranged guard break that would pull you in. If you did not counter guard break, it would pull you in and you would enter sickle rain. And sickle rain was pretty busted back in the day because it made you have hyper armor, so the enemy team could simply just wail on you without being interrupted. There's no hit stun whatsoever when you're trapped there. You just had to take it like a good boy. Now Shinobi was absolutely cancerous in that way because if you did it from behind them, from the side where they were busy, if they did a forward dodge with no attacks whatsoever, if they were in recoveries, and mind you, a lot of attacks back in the day had huge amounts of startups and recoveries that were incredibly bad, so Shinobi could easily exploit this if he was behind them and timed his ranged heavies perfectly. And you were pretty much safe 99% of the time if you were at a safe distance. If you're right in front of them, you probably eat a heavy to the face, but if you're super far away, which you should be because you could easily out-rotate them so quickly with your quadruple dashes and your smokeless dashes, you would be 100% fine if you threw it. You did feed a bit of revenge with it, I'm not gonna lie to you, but who really cares? Honestly, who really did care? So this was absolutely cancer, but it was so fun. I kid you not. It was absolutely it's like being a Jormungandr stamina bully or Centurion stamina bully. That's how fun it was. The ranged heavies were probably the most annoying thing about Shinobi's kid back in the day. He could also throw two ranged heavies, but the second ranged heavy was feintable, so if you went for a parry, he could easily feint into guard break and land some 40 damage guard break punish. That's right. That is right. He had 30 damage for his first heavy, and the follow-up light was 10 damage. So he had one of the highest guard break punishes in the entire game. Shinobi truly made you feel like there was nothing you could really do unless you walked to him and engaged him. The only thing you could do in those situations was slowly pan your way towards him. When you played Shinobi, you played Shinobi, okay? When you fought against a Shinobi, you were playing Shinobi's game, and you weren't playing for honor anymore, you were playing against Shinobi, and that's a completely crazy idea. Okay, you'll see in the gameplay that these ranged heavies were absolutely ridiculous, and it made people's lives miserable. Another crazy thing was that his zone cost almost a full stamina bar, so it was absolutely horrible. Given the fact that he did have really good ranged heavies, his zone and his option selects were pretty mid because you could easily punish him severely afterwards. He also had really poor hitboxes on his finisher heavies. You could barely track people. You know, the mix-up right now with his forward somersault kick, that kick right there, they still kept it, but it dealt so much damage. It's not guaranteed on most things, but it would deal so much stamina damage and knock them back. It was absolutely insane. So what was Shinobi's main mix-up? Well, basically, it was going to a forward dodge into a double dodge, actually. So he didn't have a forward dodge into a bash mix-up like he does now with the kick. He has to do double dodges. So it was actually quite slower, but the neat thing is that even though they nerfed the 400 MS kick, they reduced it to 600 MS, he still had some decent openers, honestly. So what you could do is that, so after you did two dodges, you're allowed to go into a heavy attack into the kick mix-up. Now, kick mix-up, you can't use it for neutral. Most people will be dodging this anyways. So what you did was when you did your double dodge, you could cancel with a raw heavy. Now, the raw heavy, you charge the heavy, and then you do another dodge again. So if you see that they dodged, you go into another dodge to punish severely with them and get 25 damage. So that was one of his mix-ups. You could double dodge, you could do a triple dodge. It's basically called quad dashing. Or there was also another tactic with Shinobi where you could do a forward dodge into a back dodge, or side dodge into a back dodge, and it would be called the smokeless dash. And this would make it so that you didn't have any smoke coming out of you when you're using his dashes, and that made it so made it a little bit harder to see, but it was mainly used for trying to punish people. I mean, even so, you can still use that charged heavy to get you into the infinite amount of dashes with however much stamina you do have. Now, mind you, this does cost a lot of stamina, but it was a decent opener. And at the higher levels, this didn't work as much, but what you would do at the higher levels is that you would do 2 dodges, and then you would throw a heavy out. Now, the heavy attack from neutral doesn't really look like the kick, but what you did before, what you're supposed to do is that after the double dodges, you would do a left heavy. This left heavy, he does like a little spin and twirl, and it kind of looked like a kick animation or the side kick animation. And what you would do is you would feint that for people that try to react to the animation. And let me remind you, Shinobi on PC compared to console is also a different breed, quite unreactable on console, especially older in console, whereas PC, he's a lot more reactable, so you had to rely more on a slower gameplay and using your animations to mess them up. That was some of the tech that Shinobi had to do against a really good player, but most of the time you're basically playing in a dual setting or even 4v4 setting. You're basically waiting your opponent to make a mistake, and with so much spacing tools that you had with your quad dashes, it was such an easy thing to do. They would just walk to you. If they wanted to light attack, if they did a forward dodge, you could easily light them because his light attacks have the most amount of damage of all time. His light attacks did 24 damage. That's right, 24 damage. Light attack, the double lights did 24 damage. And then afterwards, you couldn't even chase him. Do you want to know why? Because his backflip literally brings you back like 20 feet. Quite frankly, one of the craziest designs that For Honor has ever done. One of the safest characters, one of the safest moves in the entire game. You thought Virgin Guard or Black Prior had safe utility? Dude, I have no idea what Shinobi was capable of. You'll see in the footage that characters can't even guard break you when you do your flip. This move had so much iframes and so much mobility. Absolutely atrocious move, but looked amazing. Old Shinobi really had so much going for him. There's a lot of good and there was a little bit of bad, but the most important thing about Shinobi, he was flashy and he was the most mobile character. Another unique thing about him too was that he had safe parries with his chargeable heavies. Highlander also had this too when he came out, but characters that could hold their heavies, they would be safe from parry into GB attempts, that is. So if someone went for a heavy attack and you tried to parry the heavy attack, but the enemy decided to go for a heavy into feint, you could easily be safe from that. All you had to do was hold the heavy and then cancel and feint, and then you would be safe. You could easily counter guard break. That was one of the strongest tools about Shinobi because he could easily have safe parries and he couldn't be punished. The only thing you could do was heavy into light attack. That was the only way to punish him. But if you did that, you also risked getting parried by your 5 RMS light attack. And so it was very dangerous to do that. You had to like make a very good read and make sure that you had to let that raw heavy fly, because if they expect a light attack, you let the raw heavy fly and then you can actually land an attack. And so with the safe parries, the great mobility that Shinobi has, and the very strong damage potential on his deflex and his normal heavy attacks, Shinobi was an absolute monster. And with the super armor kick too, this was ridiculous. This character was gonna get nerfed. Sickle Rain in the back in the day also did bleed damage, which was amazing. I really like that aspect. I think the bleed, so the initial attack or the initial heavy attack for Sickle Rain, I believe it did 30 damage, and then you had 3 ticks of bleed 3 times. So it's 3, 3, 3, so it'd be 9 damage overall. I think it was a 39 damage punish. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I remember. And the bleed was purple back in the day. Remember that? Anybody remember purple bleed? There's a bunch of channels that have dedicated a bunch of videos to seeing and keeping the old minion kill animations alive. And as you can see here, this is basically executions in real time. Executions on minions. And I absolutely adore adore that. Now I love that. Look how satisfying that is. The clear on that was insanely good. He could also just do a zone, which is what we do now, but having these options, it's just so cool, man. Like, it just gives the character so much personality. Honestly, so much personality. A lot of people complained about how it was the best minion clear move in the game, but then again, we have characters today like Magi who can clear it in 3 swings. In 3 swings, and Peacekeeper can clear it in 2. And I feel like that argument has set sail. It's just not a good argument anymore, because look at this. There's also people who said that minion clear animations were just not a great idea. Personally, I feel that it gives a breath of fresh air to For Honor instead of constantly having to PvP all the time. And this is a PvP game, sure, but it includes elements of PvE by fighting the minions, and we know how strong the minions can be. I really miss these animations. I hope that Ubisoft brings them back in For Honor 2 or something, because it really gives style to certain characters. It gives us a break from all of the OP gangs that are in For Honor today. Being in the minion lane with these cool animations kind of feels like the eye of the storm before you get back into the clusterfuck that is For Honor, especially with all these dodge cancels and dodge attacks. Now, come June, Shinobi players were finally rejoicing because the devs had finally announced a Shinobi testing grounds. Testing grounds made it so that you could actually test the character with their new crazy and wacky ideas. And you know how the devs are, they do some insane stuff. The testing grounds was going to blow everybody's mind. This rework was one of the craziest things we've ever seen, and they really went all out with Shinobi's rework. I swear this might be one of the best reworks they've ever done to a character while keeping and retaining the identity of a character. So for Shinobi, one of the biggest problems about the character was not really having offense and being able to abuse the slide, also being able to outspace his opponent simply by using a simple backflip, and then of course not really having a viable opener or at least an interactive offense. They already nerfed the backflip one time because people were complaining about it, how you got so much space by simply doing one move. You literally were unpunishable. It didn't have that much iframes as it does today, but you were so far away that nobody could guard break you or even attack you. Man, just looking at how Shinobi's, this is Shinobi's first testing ground. So what his ranged heavies did was that they wall splatted. They freaking wall splat. They weren't unblockable yet. I mean, actually they were unblockable, but you could block them. But as you can see there, it wall splats, and it was so freaking broken. You were able to land Sickle Rain and then set the enemy up for a pin, so your teammate can land some freaking heavy damage. Like, holy smokes. The kick is 500 MS, but every single time you land a kick on a heavy parry or just from neutral, and there was a wall nearby, it was so much freaking damage. Super unbearable, honestly. And they didn't keep this iteration too. It was just in testing grounds, and I'm so glad they did not keep it. It feels like a Fira day 1 wall splat, okay? It was horrible. Yeah, just having, you also were able to do 2 ranged heavies, and they decided to take that out altogether. That forward somersault too, they also buffed it so that it would have like a crap ton of iframes. It has so much iframes, and that ranged heavy has so much knockback. Look at that, so much knockback. This was his rework, pretty freaking insane, honestly. Really, really strong and a little bit overtuned. Dude, the target swap thing was crazy too. You could target swap that, actually pretty freaking redonkulous. Being able to target swap, there's a lot of crazy bugs that you could do with Shinobi. It was definitely unintended, and it becomes unblockable, so you can't actually parry it or block it, apparently. From what I remember, that was a crazy thing that Shinobi had, where if you target swap and you threw the attack, it was pretty much unparryable and unblockable. So what basically changed about Shinobi was that he lost his really defensive playstyle where he simply just walked around everywhere, but now he was an active team fighter and an active ganker, so he had to be in the front lines. You couldn't really play him in the back lines as much. He had to be in the front, and that was good, but unfortunately he came with a bunch of freaking bugs. If you see that he does a backflip into a forward roll, that was ridiculously good. Had a lot of iframes, and you had a lot of distance you could cover to go into your mix-up. Quite a freaking strong tool. You'll also see in the footage that they tried to keep his ranged heavies part of his kit, and obviously that can be very hard and detrimental to the character, because if you're trying to make something, you know, unique but also powerful, you're gonna have a lot of trouble. And trouble they did find, because those ranged heavies, once you target swap them, they were unblockable, and you were basically able to get a wall splat into guaranteed Sickle Rain. So pretty freaking ridiculous, man. I swear to gosh, I don't think they were thinking when they made this, but of course we always try to test things out to see if it's actually viable and fun to play against. But Truth of the matter is, it's not fun to play against. It was pretty much testicular torture when you jumped into testing grounds when you fought against a bunch of Shinobis. He was incredibly mobile in team fights. He had a lot of iframes on that dodge, could guarantee tons of damage with wall splats, strong ganks, an undodgeable and unblockable top-heavy finisher now, so he had a really strong 50-50 mix once he got you into that kick mix-up. So you had to respect the crap out of him, and respect the crap out of him in team fights when he was engaging in offense. You never knew what he was going to do, and you never knew when he's going to target swap to you and hit you with that unblockable. It was super freaking scary. Thank God it was only for a week or so with testing grounds. Honestly, I really like this version of Shinobi. It's just that he definitely was a little bit overtuned in the first testing grounds. Another nice thing too about Shinobi is that they also buffed it so that you can go into your sickle rain mix-up after landing your zone attack, or the second hit of the zone attack that is feightable. Not a lot of people let this fly anyways in the first place, but it's nice to get some more offense when you do land an attack. There was no more Shinobis who simply backwalked and pressed double light and then backflip again to do nothing, or to do a quad dash and simply do nothing. And of course, the smokeless and the infinite quad dashing has been removed from his entire kit in testing grounds, that is. Losing the ranged heavies from neutral on the Kurosama and being able to charge that heavy attack was gone, and that's a fairly hard thing to balance too. It's honestly really hard to balance this character out if he keeps those ranged heavies and if he keeps those quad dashes. One of the only ways to do that was to make it so that you'd have to reduce the range significantly on those ranged heavies and essentially give that ranged guard break less range and more time for your opponents to counter guard break, since it was most abused during people's recoveries or when you were behind them. And with this incredibly complicated character and rework, it obviously took them quite a long time. It took about 2 months, started in July and ended in September, and Shinobi finally was what he is today essentially. There have been a few adjustments to his kit, like his damage values, the revenge tags on his sickle rain, which barely feed any revenge whatsoever, and they had to nerf the crap out of that and make it feed revenge because it didn't do anything beforehand. It was probably one of the best ganking tools of all time for a very long period of time. And so with the final product, what you've got is Shinobi without any ranged heavies whatsoever. You can't target swap these. You can still target the somersault, but after the backflip and whatnot, you're not able to go into any ranged heavies, and especially no more wall splats on the follow-up heavy attack, which is a bash after your initial kick. So it does count as a bash instead of a normal heavy attack. And I think overall they left what made Shinobi unique. He still keeps his double dodges. He obviously gets a very strong defensive tool with one dodge to the left or right and going into a bash, and this was safe at the time and before they nerfed side dodge bashes, so you could spam this as an option select pretty early and it was unpunishable. Really good move. You had 2 opportunities to option select a bash mix-up or an undodgeable mix-up, which is Shinobi's strongest tool and one of the most broken things out there. And once you know about this mix-up and once you learn how to use his double dodges and try to outspace your opponent with it, you are going to absolutely shred with Shinobi. And I'd say at the end of the day, this made Shinobi a lot more enjoyable. Even though he's still one of the best characters, at least he is an offensive character that doesn't just stare at you the entire time. Beforehand, all he did was look at you and punish you for trying to attack, and offense was absolutely terrible back in the golden For Honor days. Now, a lot of characters have good offense, and you can punish a Shinobi who tries to play way too defensively. There's plenty of Shinobis that are pretty butthurt about losing the ranged heavies, and especially the ranged card break, as this was such a troll and hilarious but powerful move that could be utilized against players who weren't really paying attention. And most of us are playing this game drunk as hell or high as hell, I'll tell you that much. And I need to do that myself. I gotta test it myself. We'll do a drunk stream one day, or a For Honor session where I'm just freaking drunk off my mind, drinking some nice cocktails. But abusing this in matchmaking was just an atrocious thing. Absolutely atrocious. Not really fun getting hit by 25 damage ranged heavies and you don't even know where the heck it's coming from. You'll see an indicator, but if they're positioned behind you, you're not going to be able to block this, or you just get hit. It does feed a bit of revenge, but it's the annoyance factor. The best way to build a character, as I've always said before, is are they fun to play against and are they fun to play as? Those are the biggest things. Being a competitive or even a person that just plays for fun, you have to follow these rules. Once those rules are broken, if it just swings one way or the other, then the game just becomes an absolute disappointment. And most players are really passionate about this game and want the game to feel good. So up in chat for all the Shinobi mains who wanted their ranged heavies back in their ranged guard breaks, because it's just an impossible thing to balance. The only thing that I can possibly think of, well, this is more of like a theory crafting session right now as we speak. So my idea was, if you wanted to keep the ranged heavies, we're gonna have to do some compromises, okay? So when Shinobi throws his ranged heavies and you parry him, he usually falls down. They've nerfed him so that he'd fall down and he'd be on the ground for a lot longer. I believe it's about 1200 ms, so there was plenty of time people to land light attacks and heavy attacks on him with the forward dodge heavy and all that nonsense to punish him, and he'd take a lot of damage. So my thing was to keep a character niche. Remember, a character that is niche needs to not be overtuned, because when they're super unique and have a really crazy mechanic that keeps them a separate from everyone else in the roster, it can be overtuned and make people's lives miserable, like absolutely miserable. So Shinobi having ranged heavy attacks, which no other character has. No other character has ranged attacks that could possibly damage an opponent without any risk at all, especially if you play this smart. So if you did get parried, I think when you fall down, you should just blow up immediately. Blow up or deal like 50 damage all around, or you take damage when you fall down. You do like 30 damage to yourself, 50 damage or 100 damage, or do like a last laugh kind of thing. Because I think you should punish players who try to cheese and utilize the range heavies. And if you get punished while you fall down like that, I think you should take a lot of damage. It's just something that would balance it out. So if you risk throwing like a 20 damage in this For Honor day and age year 9, I think they would probably nerf the range attack to like 20 damage, not 25, since it'd be abused pretty well against good Shinobis. But if you do manage to get parried and you're really stupid with it and really silly, then you should get punished severely for it, because the other player made an insane read to punish you. So if you plan to be a silly Billy, you should be punished for it, but if you are really good with your spacing and perhaps your sneakiness, then you should also be rewarded for that, and it'll create a different skill curve for players that actually use their brain. There have been a lot of people that have also asked for the smokeless dash or giving the quad dash back, but the problem with that pretty much lies within his current iteration. Having the double dodge mechanic already is incredibly good, because you can essentially option select or react to the bash or undodgeable mix-up. Characters like Nobushi and Blackbriar have the simple chain bash or undodgeable mix-up. Most characters have to eat the undodgeable if they do dodge that bash, but Shinobi has the power to essentially be safe from both mix-ups. The Blackbriar who is going for the undodgeable or the bash has to make a read on going for the undodgeable and then using a guard break, because you can't let the undodgeable fly, because Shinobi can easily dodge to the side and dodge into the undodgeable and get a free deflect. And in there lies the mix-up for high-level games, the mind games. So once you know that the Shinobi is trying to basically option select both of your mix-ups, you have to make a read and decide to go for a guard break. But if he decides that you are going to do that mix-up, he might as well just do one dodge to the side and then hit you with his dodge bash. And it can be fairly annoying to try to guess how many times he's gonna dodge bash you, but that is the character that we play currently and play against. And that's probably one of the biggest reasons on why it's kind of complicated to give him 4 dodges in a row. That'd be pretty insane. The other issue is that it would just be the best spacing tool. Shinobi probably already has the best repositioning tool with the double dodges. Giving him 4 of these would just be absolutely OP. You could run circles, there would be no way to catch him, and you can get a bunch of accidental deflects. It's just not a good idea. The only thing I could probably consider is that if they kept it, they'd have to make the dodges have a very short range, and if they did that, it would look a bit weird. But I don't know if that would be a bad idea, because our forward dodges and our back dodges already have short distances, and Shinobi doing 4 of those without moving super duper far, he could probably just move how far he is right now with 2 dodges, and even so, that's already a little bit too strong. I mean, characters like Raider have an incredible side dodge where you can literally traverse time and space and be next to you in like 3 dodges. So Shinobi could possibly get that treatment if he gets the 4 dodges, but I think that's a bad idea at this moment in time. I would like to see if it could happen, but I don't think the devs are planning on doing this anytime soon. One possibility that I think that could possibly happen for the character to balance it out is that they could remove the first dodge into bash defensive option. Just allow him to get the bash on the double dodges, and that would make it so that it'd be a little bit more balanced, and you have a lot more time to guard break him in his vulnerabilities, so he wouldn't be able to spam that as an option select every single time, and then he'd still be able to keep that quad dash, which was pretty freaking sick. And that's pretty much all I have to say about Shinobi, besides please remove shooting stars. Dear God, this move is ridiculously brain dead and absolutely should not do 80 damage as a tier 2, and most of the time get 40 damage total for a tier 2. Please God, Ubisoft. So the question is Shinobi better as year 1 or year 9? That is a good looking question, Timmy. A darn good looking question. And personally, I'm just gonna have to say that there were a lot of fun things about Shinobi back in the past. Would I want to keep some of the old things like range guard break, falling down flat on your flat ass and taking a bajillion damage with the new rework ideas that I had? Sure, yes, of course. And would I like to be able to do quad dashes with old Shinobi? Yes, but the spacing was the most annoying thing about the character. It was really hard to play against him, but I'm thinking now, with the characters that we have currently with good roll catchers, undodgeable mix-ups, great for momentum, lots of stamina, I think it could be a possibility that we could bring him back, and it wouldn't be that annoying as long as we shorten the range and the distance of what you could do with the double dodges and make it a little bit more vulnerable. Then I think we can have that niche character, that ninja, but we can't make him too strong, otherwise he'd be really overpowered. Now compared to the character we have right now, Shinobi is an absolute menace. He still keeps a lot of his mobility and a lot of his unique qualities that make him stand out above the rest of the roster, and I think he is objectively the stronger character, and honestly, objectively, he is more fun to play. He's more engaging, even though he can have really strong ganks, and he still has that spacing tool in 4v4, but he is a better character and he feels better to play. I personally have a lot of fun playing him in Dominion, as I really like to just dance around my opponents, do some cool backflips and somersaults, and Sickle Rain is quite a disgusting looking animation. I love using it, and I think the character really has top tier animations. And that is going to be the end of the video. Truly, I think Shinobi is one of Ubisoft's greatest accomplishments on reworking a character, stays unique, viable in all the metas so far, and hides all the fun away in For Honor when I do fight a really good Shinobi. Because truth of the matter is, you don't jump into For Honor because it's fun, you jump into it because you're stuck in the never-ending cycle of pain and suffering. But don't worry, your box boy will always be with you. Bye bye. See you later.